And then I have the great pleasure to introduce Stefania Maurizi, investigative journalist, to speak to you about her research.
Good afternoon, and thank you for being here. I feel very honored and grateful to the organizer of this event. And I have to say that other journalistic organizations refuse to host this event, kind of seminar on this case. And so I'm grateful to the organizer, I'm grateful to Reporters Without Borders Sweden. So I will discuss this case, and I'm here to provide facts. I'm a journalist, I'm an investigative journalist. I have been a journalist for the last 22 years, 16 years in the field of investigative journalism. And you may ask why an Italian journalist come to Sweden to discuss this case. It sounds unusual. So I want to introduce, I want to try to explain, to bring facts, to bring documents, and to explain why I have worked many years, actually almost 14 years on this case, not just on this case, of course. I have not just worked on this case as a journalist, but very intensely on this case. And I will explain you why. So let's go. Can we hope and make
Yes.
the...
Wait, one.
I'm gonna fix it.
Yeah?
30 seconds.
I have to go in
Thank
the
you.
room.
Sorry, 30 seconds.
It's okay. I think it's important that I'm able to show you some documentation I have obtained thanks to this trench warfare. I called it a trench warfare because I have been fighting to obtain the documentation about this case since 2015. I have been fighting in Sweden, in United Kingdom, in the United States, in Australia, to get the hard documents, because we journalists, especially we investigative journalists, must access the documentation in order to reconstruct the case factually. And four governments have used all their resources, all their legal resources, in order to stop my access, to block my access. And however, what I have obtained is still very relevant, very important. So I want to show you some of the documentation. I have called this talk, like my book, Secret Power, WikiLeaks and its Enemies. I have put 14 years of my investigative work in this book, which required me 2.5 years of writing work, just to put together all information in a narrative form, so that people can read it with pleasure, because I believe the reason why people read books is that they like to read them. So, I'm an Italian investigative journalist. I have worked 14 years for L'Espresso e la Repubblica, and I currently write for the Italian daily Fatto Quotidiano after I resigned from La Repubblica in 2020. I did a jump in the dark. I wanted to keep doing my work on WikiLeaks, and in La Repubblica it was no longer possible because its editorial line has deeply changed. So I had to decide whether to keep working for La Repubblica or keep working on this case. And I decided to leave my newspaper and I had no idea whether I could find another job as a journalist. As you know, we are having very difficult times. And but I was lucky. Today I work for Il Fatto Quotidiano, and I have worked 14 years on this case, not just on the WikiLeaks case alone, of course, but very intensely on it. And if I had not followed this case very closely, I would have never believed what I have seen. Let me tell you what I have seen. I mean, newspapers pay you to be there, to see what happened. That's why they pay you, to stay where things happen, so that you bring your experience and you see what's going on in first person. Ken Loach, the famous British filmmaker who wrote his foreword to my book, wrote, "This is a book that should make you very angry. It is the story of a journalist imprisoned and treated with unbearable cruelty for exposing war crimes, of the determination by British and American politicians to destroy him, and the quiet connivance of the media in this monstrous injustice." And this case goes beyond Julian Assange. It doesn't really matter what you think about Julian Assange as a person. It goes beyond. It is the battle for a journalism that shed light on the highest level of power. I call this level secret power, but it's nothing conspiratorial. I could use the word military intelligence complex, military industrial complex, as President Eisenhower famously said. The hurt is CIA, NSA, the Pentagon, but of course there is more than these agencies. There are the diplomacy, and there are the media, and in our democracies, especially in European democracies, ordinary people, usually doesn't even perceive as relevant to his everyday life. People say, well, I'm a humble teacher in Stockholm. Why I should care about the military industrial complex? What's its influence on my life as an ordinary citizen? You know, I focus on the visible power, the power that discusses my pensions, my job, my education. And yet, this level of power has deeply influenced our lives as ordinary citizens. For example, it decides whether we spend 20 years in Afghanistan waging a war for nothing, basically, because Afghanistan is even worse than it was 20 years ago when we went there. While we don't have the money for hospitals, we don't have the money for pensions. This is what's happening in my country, for example. We have our health system collapsing, but we spent 20 years in Afghanistan and spent almost 9 billion euros, 53 people died, 700 people were injured. For what? For what? Afghanistan worse than it was, you know? So the ordinary citizen has no control on this level of power, or what I call secret power, the highest level, where the state body moves, the intelligence services, armies, diplomacy moves. The ordinary citizen has no control because she has no access to the restricted information on how this power operates. It's shielded by a thick layer of secrecy, state secrecy. But for the first time in history, WikiLeaks have ripped a gaping hole on the secret power, giving billions of people systematic and unrestricted access to enormous archives of classified documents, revealing how our governments behave when completely shielded from public and media scrutiny, they prepare wars or commit atrocities. The US secret files, for which Julian Assange risks spending 175 years in prison, are among the most important pieces of journalism of all time, the Afghan war logs. These are the documents for which he risked 175 years. The Afghan war logs, the Iraq war logs, the US diplomacy cables, the Guantanamo files. If you read this indictment, you see these documents are the reason why he risked 175 years in prison. What they have allowed to reveal? They have allowed to revealing the true face of the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. They have permitted exposing war crimes, like those depicted in the video, in the collateral murder video. They have allowed revealing 15,000 civilian victims in Iraq, never counted before. And you say, well, we had hundreds of thousands of civilian victims, 15,000 more, 15,000 left. Well, for a father or a mother, these are just not statistics, you know? They have allowed revealing crucial information on the Guantanamo detainees, not just the military task force operating the detention camp, but also on detainees kept in that unique hell, which is Guantanamo. They have allowed revealing important information on the deeply inhumane drone war, in which individuals are assassinated on the basis of secret information which no one knows and no one can challenge. They have allowed revealing pressures on authorities, including pressure on Italian authorities, to grant impunity to the CIA agents responsible for kidnapping an individual in the middle of the day in Milan, as if he was in Chile's Pinochet. Let me tell you, I'm very proud of my country. It was the only country which was able to identify the CIA agents, to charge them, to put them on trial in absentia, because of course they had left Italy, and to obtain final sentences for all of them. The only country in the world. I was very proud, and we had these American journalists coming to Italy, try to understand how this kidnapping work, how prosecutors were finding about these kidnappings. However, none of them spent a day in prison. None of them. They got complete impunity, absolute impunity. Of course, we could imagine pressure on our politicians. The Americans didn't put pressure on the judges and the prosecutors, because they write in these documents, the US diplomacy cables, the Italian prosecutors are fiercely independent, so they had no way to stop the investigation, to stop the prosecutors, to stop the judges. So what did they do? They put pressure on the politicians, and it worked. 6 justice ministers refused to forward the arrest warrant to the US. So at the end of the day, Italy, the only country in the world which basically obtained a final sentence for all CIA and intelligence people responsible for kidnapping this human being in Milan in the middle of the day, basically Italy ended up condemned by the European Court of Human Rights for granting them impunity. It was a really absurd thing. All these facts were public, well known. However, even if we could imagine pressure on our politicians, we could have never ever obtained evidence. And we got this evidence only thanks to the WikiLeaks cables, which reported the full conversation with our politicians, telling you should not forward these request arrest because nothing would ruin our bilateral relationships between Italy and the United States than forwarding this arrest warrant. And our politicians complied, all of them. both conservative and progressive. So we got evidence. Finally, we got evidence. We just didn't have an educated guess. We got evidence only thanks to these secret documents, the US diplomacy cables, in which secrecy is not used to protect citizens. You know, I have spent more than 10 years revealing state secrets, violating state secrets. However, I acknowledge that there are some secrets which are fully legitimate. Not all secrets are alike. The secrets which are intended to protect our security, the secrets which protect the security measure of a power plant, of an airport, or a train station, those are perfectly legitimate secrets. And it would be criminal to reveal the security measures that protect an airport, a power plant, so that terrorists can use to do terror attacks. But these secrets have nothing to do with our security. These secrets shield state criminality, because it is state criminality to kidnap a person in the middle of the day in Milan, to bring him to Egypt and torture him, as it happened in this case. This has nothing to do with security, with protecting the security of citizens. This has to do with state criminality. And in fact, our prosecutors identified all of them, charged all of them, put them on trial, and got sentences, relevant, important sentences, 9 years, 6 years, for all of them. So it is just for these revelations, exclusively for these revelations, that Julian Assange risks spending his life in prison. And it is only a matter of a few months. And if the United States authorities win their extradition case, it will be his death. Physical, mental, and professional. He will be extradited, put on trial with no chance of getting a fair trial, no chance whatsoever, and put in prison for life. I think no case better than this one exemplifies the upside-down world we live in, where the war criminals exposed by WikiLeaks are free as the air, and they sleep at home with their families peacefully in their beds, while the journalists who have the courage and integrity to expose them have never known freedom and sleep in a high-security prison in London. This is an upside-down world. And Julian Assange is not the only one at serious risk. Secret power, doesn't want to destroy him alone. He wants to destroy him, the WikiLeaks journalists, because of course he hasn't done all alone. It's a media organization. It's not just Julian Assange WikiLeaks. But at the end of the day, secret power want to kill the revolution unleashed by WikiLeaks. And yet, if there is any journalism worth practicing, it is precisely the journalism that reveals abuse at the highest level of powers. I started working on the WikiLeaks case in 2008, and in 2009, I published the first document in partnership with Julian Assange and WikiLeaks. It was before the collateral murder video, the classified video in which an American Apache helicopter is seen killing defenseless civilians in Baghdad while the crew laughs. Look at those dead bastards. After revealing collateral murder, WikiLeaks went from being an organization known only to a niche public to an international phenomenon. In 2010, I worked on the Afghan war logs. I traveled to Berlin to meet Julian Assange and Christian Ruffson, who is currently the WikiLeaks editor-in-chief, to establish a media partnership on the files for my newspaper. I will never forget that meeting. Assange arrived at my hotel in Berlin late in the evening with no luggage. The luggage had disappeared in a direct flight from Stockholm, where he had just ended up in a criminal investigation on alleged rape and sexual molestation. The rape investigation had been opened on the 20th of August 2010, closed the 25th of August 2010 by the chief prosecutor of Stockholm, Eva Finne, because in her judgment, the suspect's conduct disclosed no crimes at all. Then reopened by a new prosecutor, Prosecutor Marianni, the 1st of September 2010. The day I met Julian Assange in Berlin was the 28th of September 2010. Since then, I have never ever met Julian Assange again as a free man. I have worked as a media partner of WikiLeaks for over a decade. I work on the Afghan war logs, on the Iraq war logs, the US diplomatic cables, the Guantanamo files, and all the secret documents. However, the last time I met Julian Assange as a free man was that September of 2010. In all my other meetings with him in the last decade took place either with him under house arrest or confined in the Ecuadorian embassy. And now is in Britain's harshest prison, Belmarsh, the harshest prison in the United Kingdom with dangerous terrorists, dangerous criminals. In 2015, after he had already spent 5 years arbitrarily detained, look, it is not my judgment that he was arbitrarily detained. It is the assessment of the UN Working Group on Arbitrary Detention, which is a highly reputable UN body. It's the body in charge of establishing who is arbitrarily detained and who is not. It's not my judgment, it's their judgment. So in 2015, after he had already spent 5 years arbitrarily detained, I decided to start a Freedom of Information battle to access the full documentation on Julian Assange and the WikiLeaks journalists to reconstruct the case factually, as journalists should do. Immediately after I filed my FOI request, it's very easy. You send an email to the authorities and you ask, I want these documents. Please provide this. Sending this request, filing this request is very easy. But of course it doesn't work that you ask for the documents and you got them. You ask for them and you don't got them. But in this case, they released me a few documents, just 226 pages, but they were crucial. They allowed learning the answer to one of the key questions around the Swedish case. Why did Swedish prosecutor Marianne, who reopened the rape case, refuse to question Julian Assange in London for 6 years? She waited 6 years. Assange had never refused to be questioned on rape and sexual molestation. Actually, he had been questioned on sexual molestation on the 30th of August 2010, when the prosecutor Eva Finne had already closed the rape investigation, and he had never refused to be questioned on the rape allegation. I have the documentation. I have the agreed facts between the two parts, the prosecution and the Julian Assange defense, before the UK Supreme Court. I have the letters from Ecuador when he asked for refuge and asylum to Ecuador. So the letter from the Ecuadorian authorities to the Swedish authorities telling, please come here in the embassy to questioning. And the Swedish authorities didn't even care to reply to them. I obtained this documentation not from the Assange defense. I don't rely on the Assange defense for this documentation because they could give me whatever they want, they could cherry pick. I obtained this documentation from the prosecution, from the Swedish foreign minister, from the UK authorities after years of litigation. So he had not refused to be questioned on the rape and sexual molestation allegation. He had refused to be extradited to Sweden simply for questioning. He was convinced that extradition to Sweden could pave the way to extradition to the United States. And almost no one believed to him. And no journalist had tried to discover why the Swedish prosecutors were not willing to take a 2-hour flight from Stockholm to London to question him and to decide whether to charge him for rape if they had enough evidence, or to drop the case if they had not enough evidence. Hundreds of national and international newspapers, press agencies, television, radio stations around the world had covered the case, simply reporting on the defense and prosecutions of opposing documents. He says, they says, they say, he says. There is a famous phrase that encapsulates the task of journalism. If someone says it's raining, and another person says it's dry, it's not your job to quote them both. Your job is to look out of the window and to find out which is true. You know? I could have never imagined how opening that window would engulf me in a journalistic investigation that is still going on at full intensity. 7 years have gone by and represented by 7 lawyers, 2 in the UK, 2 in the US, 2 in Australia, 1 in Sweden, Percy Bratt, who is here, and to whom I'm very, very grateful for his amazing work. The documents which the Swedish prosecution released to me under FOI allowed revealing for the first time that it was the UK authorities at the Crown Prosecution Service that had advised the Swedish prosecutors not to question Assange in London. The Crown Prosecution Service is the British public authority which prosecutes criminal cases in England and Wales. CPS was providing assistance to the Swedish authorities because Assange was under investigation in Sweden, but physically he was in London. So they needed the cooperation of the UK authorities. The Swedish sex investigation is now closed, but the Crown Prosecution Service is still playing a prominent role in the Assange case because the United States is acting through the Crown Prosecution Service to try to extradite Assange to the United States. Again, he's wanted in the US, but he's in London, so the US had to act through the Crown Prosecution Service. This is why it's so important to look closely what this Crown Prosecution Service does. So this is one of the documents I obtained from Sweden, initially without any litigation. And here the Crown Prosecution Service tell Marianne, my earlier advice remains that in my view it would not be prudent for the Swedish authorities to interview the defendant in the UK. Such an interview would need to be pursuant to a letter of request. So they advise not to question him. Note, they call him defendant. In the British language, it means a person who has been charged with a crime. He was not charged. He was wanted to be questioned. In the Swedish case, which has, almost a decade of investigation, There were never charges, never ever, you know, never ever. So it was the Crown Prosecution Service, and by advising the Swedish prosecutors not to question Assange in London, the Crown Prosecution Service advised them against the only legal strategy that could have brought the case to a rapid solution, questioning Julian Assange in London, rather than insisting on extradition at all costs after years and years. The FOI documents provide indisputable evidence that the Crown Prosecution Service, then headed by Sir Keir Starmer, the current leader of the British Labour Party, contributed to creating the legal and diplomatic quagmire which kept Assange arbitrarily detained since 2010, from 2010 on. The Crown Prosecution Service also wrote to the Swedish prosecutors. It is what is going on? Okay. It is simply amazing how much work this case is generating. It sometimes seems like an industry. It is certainly not stop. Please do not think that the case being dealt with as just another extradition request. What was so special about the case that it was not just another extradition request? Here is the document so that you can read in the last paragraph what I'm telling you. After receiving this documentation from the Swedish authorities at the Swedish Prosecution Authority, I immediately submitted an FOI request to the Crown Prosecution Service in London, asking for the full correspondence on the Assange case with the Swedish authorities, with the US authorities, with the Ecuadorian authorities, full correspondence between 2010 and 2015, because I started this in 2015. CPS rejected my request, and I sued them. I sued them. I paid with my own money. No, my newspaper at that time, La Repubblica, was not willing to support me. Initially, I paid myself. When I reached 6,000 euros in legal fees, I said, I cannot go ahead. I had a modest salary. So I had to look for a grant for investigative journalism to try to pay the legal fees. Consider I'm doing this work completely for free, just to unearth the truth, because no one had done it. A man has remained 12 years without, working as a free man, and no journalist had tried to get this documentation. So someone has to do the hard work of looking for the truths, unearthing the truth. So, after I sued them, the CPS released me a few hundred pages, almost completely redacted. However, some of them contained important revelations, such as the fact that in 2012, when Julian had basically asked for asylum to Ecuador and took refuge in the embassy, the UK Crown Prosecution Service wrote to Mariani, journalists, don't you dare get cold feet, because the press report reported that maybe Sweden could drop the case. And the Crown Prosecution Service wrote to her, don't you dare get cold feet. And you ask yourself, why a British authorities is interested in a Swedish sex case to tell them, don't you dare get cold feet. Here it is. Don't you dare get, this is the original document I have obtained. Another crucial revelation emerged from the documents released to me by the Crown Prosecution Service after I sued them, is the revelation that in 2013, even the Swedish authorities began to question the dead end they had ended up at the advice of the British authorities by insisting on extradition at all costs. So they realized after 3 years that there was no chance whatsoever to extradite him. So why to go ahead this way in an unproductive way? In October 2013, the Swedish prosecutors considered closing the extradition proceedings and revoking the European arrest warrant, writing this email, Marianne me, to the Crown Prosecution Service. You don't see the recipients, but if you read the threads, you understand, you can deduct that this email was sent by Marianne me to the Crown Prosecution Service. And she writes, there is a demand in Swedish law for coercive measures to be proportionate. The time passing, the costs, and how severe the crime is to be taken into account, together with the intrusion or detriment to the suspect. Against this background, we have found us to be obliged to consider to lift the detention order, court order, and to withdraw the European arrest warrant. If so, this should be done in a couple of weeks. This would affect not only us, but you too in a significant way. Again, our withdrawing an arrest, the European arrest warrant would affect the British authorities. At that time, there was no public knowledge of any UK investigation on Julian Assange. It was just the sex case in Sweden. Why withdrawing the arrest warrant would affect the British authorities? And when she wrote that email to the Crown Prosecution Service, she wrote to the Crown Prosecution Service, hope I didn't ruin your weekend again. Why would a Swedish prosecutor dropping an extradition attempt for a sex case in Sweden would ruin the weekend of the Crown Prosecution Service? It doesn't make sense, you know? Here is the original. I hope I didn't ruin your weekend. You can see the original document. I obtained these documents after so many years of legal battle. If you want to use these documents, I'm very, very happy. This has to be public knowledge. I only ask you for credit to quote that these documents come from my FOI battle, because it does request such a huge effort. So the anomalous handling of the Swedish case by prosecutor Marianne me, to which the Crown Prosecution Service has contributed, resulted in justice for no one. Contributed to the devastation of Assange's health. His health is destroyed. If you read the medical assessment in the sentences in London, you realize how his health is compromised. And if he will come out safe and free, I don't think he will be the same man again. So it cost British taxpayers at least £13.2 million to keep the Ecuadorian embassy under siege. These are statistics, official statistics by the mayor of London. And in my book, I have documented all of them. For each document I quote from, you have the reference from where the documents come from, how I obtained them, so that people cannot say this is not real, this did not happen. And it resulted in the UN Working Group on Arbitrary Detention decision that Sweden and the United Kingdom had arbitrarily detained Assange since 2010. In the case of Sweden, for the first time, the UN Working Group had ever made such a decision in the country's history. I checked this with the Swedish authorities, whether there had been ever Sweden detaining arbitrarily. No, this is the first time in Sweden, in the Swedish history. When I tried to dig into this question, I unearthed that the Crown Prosecution Service had destroyed key documents that they had exchanged with the Swedish authorities. And I unearthed this because they were claiming they had released me the full correspondence, and I discovered it was not true. And it was not true. Why I discovered this? Because there were crucial weeks, such as the weeks Julian Assange had obtained asylum. It was impossible that the Swedes and the British had not communicated. But there were no documents. So it was not true that the documents they had released to me were the full correspondence between the Swedish authorities and the British authorities. So when my FOI lawyers in London asked the Crown Prosecution Service, please provide the full correspondence, because this is not the full correspondence, they said, we destroy it. I have been informed that we searched electronic records and found that all the data associated with Paul Close's account, Paul Close is the Crown Prosecution Service lawyer who advised not to question him from the very beginning, was deleted when he retired and cannot be recovered. If they ever existed for the emails beyond the ones we have identified, of course they existed. Of course, no doubt, because as I said, there were gaps in crucial weeks in which it was impossible they had not communicated. They were not printed off and filed by Paul Close, and the electronic copies were deleted when he retired and are no longer in possession of the Crown Prosecution Service. What exactly did the Crown Prosecution Service destroy? Why? They destroyed key documents about a legal case which was ongoing, high profile, highly controversial. Let me tell you, I come from a country, Italy, where we have all sorts of legal scandals, judicial scandals, political scandals. But when I discovered this fact, this destruction of documents by the Crown Prosecution Service, I asked well-experienced prosecutors in Italy, which are following important mafia case, terrorism case, corruption case. I asked them, did we ever have a situation in which a public authority destroyed documentation on a case which is ongoing, high profile, highly controversial? They said no. Maybe some mysterious arson from some mysterious actor made the documents disappear, but never a case in which the same authority, the legal authority, destroyed them. Not even a country with so many scandals like Italy ever had this destruction of documents by the very same public authority. And I have discovered this in 2017, while I was litigating against the Crown Prosecution Service. I went to the embassy, Julian Assange was still in the embassy, and I went to the Ecuadorian embassy to discuss this fact and other facts with Julian Assange. And this is what happened to my phone. While we were talking in a room, in the conference room, someone accessed my backpack, opened it, accessed all my devices, opened my phone in two, extracted the SIM card, and took this picture. Fortunately, they took this picture, so we have evidence. They were idiots enough to take pictures, so we have evidence, and I filed a criminal complaint about this case, which is ongoing in Spain, because allegedly, we don't know who did it. Allegedly, he was done by the company, the Spanish company in charge of the security of the embassy on CIA behalf. Allegedly. There is this ongoing investigation, and I filed this criminal complaint because this is what happened to my phone. Secretly, we discovered 2 years later. So in the last 5 years, my lawyers and I have intensely tried to ask for explanation to the Crown Prosecution Service. Why you destroyed the documentation, what the documents destroyed contain, who instructed you to destroy the documentation. They have refused to provide any explanation as to why they have destroyed and on whose instruction. They claim the documents were destroyed in 2014 when Keir Starmer had already left the Crown Prosecution Service because Keir Starmer left in 2013. They claim they did it in 2014, but we have no, that's the version of the facts. And they have no clue, apparently, on what was lost once they destroyed the documentation. And they were never able to bring a shred of written policy that the destruction was perfectly legal. Quite the opposite. They produced the Crown Prosecution Service Record Management Manual, which states that the general correspondence relating to a criminal case file should be retained for 5 years from the date of most recent correspondence. So 6 years after I discovered the destruction, I'm still fighting, pressing them, obsessing them legally to get an explanation. After I discovered the destruction of correspondence by the UK authorities, I thought, well, if they destroyed, the Swedish authorities should have it, because it was correspondence between them. So if one party destroyed it, the other side should have it. So we asked for the correspondence to the Swedish Prosecution Authority. And my lawyer, Swedish lawyer, knows how we have been fighting hard to get this correspondence. Neither the Swedes nor the British have ever attempted to clarify how many pages of correspondence they had exchanged about Julian Assange. However, the British authorities did provide us with an estimate. From 2010 to 2015, the Crown Prosecution Service and the Swedish authorities exchanged between 7,200 and 9,600 pages of correspondence on Julian Assange. This is, they say, I identified 24 files which contain correspondence with the Swedish prosecution authorities. There were a solo, and they say each file contained between 300 and 400 pages. So if you do the maths, you get that they exchange between 7,200 and 9,600 pages. However, the Swedish prosecution authority claims that this is not the case. And in particular, the Swedish prosecutor Eva-Marie Persson, who reopened the rape case in 2019 after Julian Assange was arrested by the Metropolitan Police and incarcerated in Belmarsh, has always insisted that there were not so many pages as the British estimated. And this was a mystery. It was correspondence between them. If one party says there's thousands and thousands, why the other side said no, it's not true? I mean, so represented by two Swedish lawyers, Percy Bratt and Susanne Finseiber, sorry for my horrific pronunciation, we have appealed to the Swedish Administrative Court of Appeal, Kammarrätten, and to the Swedish Parliamentary Ombudsman, Justitieombudsmannen, to request an investigation into the discrepancy between what the British authority told us and what the Swedish prosecution denied. Both the Swedish Administrative Court of Appeal and the Swedish Parliamentary Ombudsman rejected our appeals. And then my lawyers will explain you the technical, legal aspects. He's the lawyer. The Parliamentary Ombudsman, Mr. Per Lennerbrand, rejected our request without any explanation for his refusal. Here you can see. Last week, so for the last 6 years, we had this situation. The British authorities at the Crown Prosecution Service had told us that they had destroyed the correspondence, and the correspondence amounted to 7,200, 9,600 between 2010 and 2015. And the Swedish authorities at the Crown Prosecution Service were telling us, no, this is not, this is not true, this is not what happened. So what happened? The Crown Prosecution Service was standing the version of the fact. They had stated it before the judge. And I wrote an email to Eva-Marie Persson, to the Swedish prosecutor. Are you telling me that these people lied to the judge? I will go to the end of the world to discover what happened to these documents. And for 6 years I appeal, represented by my prominent lawyer, Swedish lawyer, Persbrandt. But no chance, no dice, we had no explanation. However, last week, during our latest FOI litigation in London, the Crown Prosecution Service finally revealed what really happened. The Swedish Prosecution Authority destroyed a substantial proportion of this material. So now we know that both sides destroyed the documentation. Both the UK Crown Prosecution Service and the Swedish authorities. I wonder why the Swedish authorities have not clarified it before, considering we have asked so many times, we have appealed, we went to the parliamentary ombudsman. Why not to tell us? This is the Crown Prosecution Service. This is the head of extradition who clarified this. And you can see, in fact, the SPA, this Swedish Prosecution Authority, appears to have previously deleted a substantial proportion of this material. So now we know that even the Swedish Prosecution Service destroyed this document. So, documentation released to us under FOI provide evidence that at least in one email exchange with the Crown Prosecution Service, Marianne and me referred to the possibility of destroying documents. In 2012, the Swedish television station TV4 obtained a potentially embarrassing email, which according to the British and the Swedish authorities was just a joke. Marianne and me wrote in an email, even better if it had been deleted immediately after reading. In another email, her associate wrote, Marianne and I filed all Assange-related emails in special folders, not available or traceable to anybody but ourselves. In another hint, you can see here. Here is the original document. In March 2017, Marianne did delete at least one email received from the FBI. She admitted this publicly. In this case, she admitted this publicly. 2017, March, those were crucial months where we would later discover that the CIA in those months had planned to kill or kidnap Julian Assange, leaving the door of the embassy open with the complicity, of course, of the company inside, and getting someone kidnapping him in the middle of the night. So the Swedish, Marianne admitted she had destroyed that email. The Swedish Administrative Court of Appeal confirmed me that the email message came from an executive of the FBI and that it had reached a chief prosecutor's first at the end of March 2007, precisely in the months the CIA was furious about Julian Assange because WikiLeaks has started revealing CIA documents on the system to penetrate computers and telephones, the so-called Vault 7. I work on them. I remember how tense it was. I was really scared to work on those documents, about secret documents about the CIA, really scared. So, the Swedish Administrative Court of Appeal confirmed to me that the email message came from an executive of the FBI and that he had reached a chief prosecutor's first at the end of March 2017. The message concerned a request for information. The message was answered by referring to information available at the website of the prosecution authority, whereupon the message was destroyed. Again, this is the Administrative Court of Appeal confirming. The message was destroyed. So it is an official sentence by the Swedish Administrative Court of Appeal to which I have appealed. Again, why they destroyed the document? This is official correspondence about a crucial case. Why they destroyed it? I mean, you wonder why they destroyed this documentation. What the documentation contain exactly? So, as Julian Assange's life hangs in balance, documents about his case are a matter of life and death. And this is why I'm here, to give you these facts. No one can deny these facts. I brought this kind of documentation to you. I wrote a book fully documenting all this, reconstructing all this rigorously. I'm a mathematician, so I like rigorous documenting the facts. And I have done this because I'm shocked. I'm shocked what I have seen in this case. I believe it's a massive scandal that the men who have revealed war crimes, who have revealed torture, has never known freedom again. Since 2010, he hasn't been able to walk in the street as a free man. And in a matter of few months, he could lose freedom forever and end up in prison for life. So I believe it's a massive scandal. And I have used my journalistic work to document this, to find this evidence which I have proposed. I'm here because never ever the Swedish media have ever reported on what I have unearthed. Never. At least some British reports were published on these facts, but I have never heard any Swedish journalists covering this. So I want to give you the facts. Then you can decide by yourself. My duty is to provide you the facts, solid facts, and to make your own mind about this case. As for me, I have decided to use my journalistic work to contribute to create a society in which you can reveal war crime and to be free and safe, because this is what democracy is. In an authoritarian state, you cannot reveal state criminality at the highest level. They kill you. They send you killers like Politkovskaya in Russia. But in a democracy, it must be possible. This is the difference between democracy and authoritarian states. And that's why I have dedicated 14 years to this case. And I won't stop working on this case until it's free. Thank you.